Chapter 6 February 12th, 1849 If you have never taken part in the departure of a great ocean sailing ship, I pity you. One cannot begin to comprehend the commotion and exhilarating chaos that prevails. It is like a 4th of July and New Year's Eve in one, and in my view, all great changes in life should be celebrated. Consider the Providence Wharf that cold and blustery day, with bits of confetti-like snow flecking the air. Crowds of people going on and off the great three-masted ship Stephanie K. People joyfully or tearfully wishing one another well. People with faces full of sorrow. People with faces full of glee. People engaged in heart-clinging farewells. People making hasty goodbyes as if separation could not come fast enough. On the wharf, men's tall hats so numerous it was like a city of smokeless chimneys. Faces full of expectations, faces full of dread, faces pale, faces flushed, tears and laughter bucketing from the same hearts. Need I say more? An entire encyclopedia of emotions. Or, if you prefer, as I did, a perfect melodrama, complete with music, for there on the wharf was a church choir that sang an optimistic hymn that God should bless us all. There was, too, all manner of cargo, trunks, bales, and boxed belongings, which needed to be brought aboard. Food and water were likewise carried on. Of course, midst the mingling multitudes of emigrants was the sailing crew, which for the Stephanie K numbered 32, plus officers, including a captain with an elegant black beard. In other words, a swirling, swarming, and scintillating ship. The anticipation was intoxicating. Even I, who never touched ardent spirits, knew that. Father, being 49 years of age, looked to be the oldest passenger. Most of the travelers on board, there were about 170 in total, were young men going to California for gold. Gold fever at the highest temperature. Indeed, the word gold buzzed in my ears as if I were standing amidst a swarm of bees in search of summer's golden nectar. On board there were only a few women and fewer children. That, I admit, gave me new feelings of trepidation, but I was bolstered by a resolve that was churning like a nor'easter about to burst. Father and Jacob had made their leave-takings to Mother at her bedside in my aunt's house. Those moments were truly tender, with as much sentiment and clear declarations of love as my parents were capable of expressing. Dear wife, I shall think of you often. Beloved husband, I shall pray for your success. In secret, I had made my own goodbyes to Mother the night before. I think Mother had begun to relish this family intrigue as much as I did. I rather suspect she was finding being a convalescent, under the imperial eye of her sister, ever drearier. Indeed, Mother, now very much wishing to travel west, spoke of embarking on one of the fast new clipper ships as soon as she could. As for the undoubted assurance of my father's great wealth to come, it lifted her spirits and was a buffer against Aunt Lavinia. Come as quickly as you can, I urged her. Everything will be better there, she said, as much to herself as me. Dearest Mother, thank you for believing in me. Know that I shall always have you in my thoughts and heart. On the day of departure, I accompanied Father and Jacob upon the Stephanie K. There was no hindrance to my boarding, since many people were going on to say goodbye to passengers. Midst all that churning of emotions and embraces, no one questioned why I was there. Once on board, as planned, I asked that Jacob be allowed to show me the sleeping place Father had reserved. Of course, said Father. In haste, my brother led me below. I quickly learned that upon these large ships there is the main deck and the bottom hold wherein cargo is carried. Between these two areas was the 'tween deck, where passengers had their belongings and sleeping compartments. I was surprised that these compartments consisted of nothing more than what looked like crudely constructed shelves for library books, the shelves hardly more than 25 inches wide. All the same, I was much relieved to see Jacob's luggage stowed there, in particular his trunk, which contained my disguise. I now knew where I could find it. When Jacob and I saw the trunk, we exchanged self-assured, conspiratorial grins. "Where is the ladies' dressing room?" I asked. "I have no idea," he returned. Well, that unnerved me considerably. There was absolutely no time to pause and investigate, so we hastened back to the main deck. Once there, the three of us, father, Jacob, and I, went to the gangway, where I spoke what I hoped sounded like heartfelt adieus to both father and Jacob. As soon as that was accomplished, I walked down the gangplank to the wharf, turned back, and waved a flamboyant farewell. After they in turn saluted me, I took a few steps away. Immediately Jacob did as I had instructed him. He pulled at father's greatcoat and dragged him away to see some far corner of the great ship. Then came the most thrilling moment, up to that time, of my entire life. I rushed back onto the ship via the same footbridge. Once on board, I raced down to Jacob's berth. Had I not learned the way? But since I had not discovered where the women's quarters were, and with my heart beating like an uncaged bird, I had no choice but to open Jacob's trunk and withdraw from its bottom the clothing I had purchased. The 'tween deck was teeming with people, passengers, families, and crew bidding farewell. Thus it was that no one cared when I flung a blanket over myself. Beneath it I dressed as a man, in trousers, shirt, and boots, my long chestnut hair stuffed into a black top hat which sat low upon my brow. When I stepped free and essayed my appearance, I had to suppress my glee as to how I must look. Did ever a girl's heart flutter so? Leaving my girl's attire in Jacob's trunk, I returned to the main deck, there to mingle among the multitudes of young men. Let it be said, it is fine to be noticed, but it is delightful to be invisible. Warning whistles began to be piped. Ship departure! Passengers who were embarking lined the rails and waved to those who retreated to the wharf. At the library in Providence I had read Mr. Poe's story, The Purloined Letter, which had impressed me with the idea that the best hiding place is right in the open. I therefore remained at the top rail in full view, in my costume of course, and waved to people on the dock as if saying good-bye to kin. Sure enough, although I stood boldly before all, I went completely unnoticed. Despite the snow, the crew climbed the rigging like uprightly spiders. Sails, from flying jib at the bow, to spanker at the stern, to main royal the topmost sail, were loosed and sheeted home. The lines that bound the Stephanie K to the east coast of the United States were cast off. Our ship was warped into Narragansett Bay. Having wind and tide in our favor, off we went. It was absolutely thrilling, so that I fairly tingled with delight. No one, save my brother Jacob, knew I was a stowaway. I suppose it is immodest to say, but I was exceedingly pleased with myself. There I was, engaged in a true adventure. None of my mother's romance books equaled this. I was the heroine in my own story. We sailed down Narragansett Bay with a colony of seagulls as our airborne escort. To my ears their squawks sounded as if they were laughing with glee, echoing my own delight. Above, the bulky, billowy sails were our own souffle of clouds. With the bay waters smack smooth, there was little in the way of disturbing movement. Shortly after we embarked, all passengers were called on deck, and the captain welcomed us by reading out his rules. All passengers must rise by 7 a.m. unless excused by the ship's doctor. Bedtime is no later than 10 p.m. No breakfast until all decks are swept and your bedding stowed. No liquor allowed. The use of gunpowder is strictly prohibited. A religious service will be held every Sunday morning by our chaplain. All are required to attend. My first mate shall make sure these rules are enforced. You may easily imagine how impatient I was, but I had to stay in disguise until we were fully out to sea. Mind, I needed to hide for only the first 2 days of a 7-month voyage. It greatly helped that during those first days, the ship was in a state of continual disarray, as passengers learned their way about. In addition, the Stephanie K was fairly packed with young men, a great many of whom were beardless youths, and since I did not look so different from them, I went unnoticed. To further support my ruse, I refrained from speaking, not wishing to reveal my feminine voice. Jacob and I had planned where and when to meet. At these appointed moments he brought not just a friendly face, but food, drink, and at our first meeting a blanket. Yes, I might have eaten at the common tables, but I preferred to take extra precautions. For me, the next 48 hours were the most challenging. We sailed down Narragansett Bay, twixt Point Judith and Newport, and then out upon the awe-inspiring Atlantic Ocean. I slept those first 2 nights on deck, one among many sleepers. To be sure, I was cold, but I learned that if you are going to be a heroine in your own adventure, a certain amount of discomfort is obligatory. At last we reached the open sea. By day, oh, the sublime, endless wonder of it! No land in sight, only ceaseless blue and white-capped foaming waves. Sails fluffed and snapped as the ship hissed and spanked through the wash. By night, a vast array of frozen stars. As we sailed, we pitched, bobbed, rolled, and yawed enough to make some people ill. Father was one of those, but I am glad to report, not me. To the contrary, my healthy heart fairly swelled in an attempt to match the immensity of the ocean, a seemingly endless world. How shall I best express it? I loved myself for loving it all. If I could, I would have hugged the universe. After 2 days had passed, I met with Jacob. He managed to maneuver Father out of his berth, where he lay in seasick discomfort. Once he left, I once again ducked beneath the blanket, this time to change back into my young woman's attire. When I emerged, no one took particular notice of me, appearing as the girl I truly was, in a modest trimmed bonnet and a full-length high-necked dress, with wide sleeves at my wrists. I also wore Mother's red shawl. As if indifferent, but hardly so, I walked about the main deck until I spied Father standing by the bulwark rail, gazing out upon the sea, perhaps pondering the immense change in his life and in his unhappy belly. I paused, relishing the moment. Oh, such wonderful drama! When the curtain lifts, is it not delightful to be on center stage? "Sir," I called to him, "Mr. Blydell."